What's the journal being pretty fast? So I was finding out who has a book. Nina, do you have a book?
I don't have one with me, but I'm sure that we've got one somewhere, but we have to have the right copy, right?
Right. So that hasn't come yet. Okay, we've got till Monday. Well, everyone will be fine. It's fine. I was, if you remember, reading about yesterday, encouraging you, because I know it's a big book, but why we would bother to read such a big book. It's like Moby Dick, you could really narrow it down to, a couple hundred pages if you just get the plot, the characters, the plot, the setting, and like, boom, what happened. But there's so much more that goes into a book like Les Mis or Don Quixote. There's also a lot of abridged in that where it just talks about his adventures, right? Do you at least theoretically understand why we'd spend so much time reading the whole thing? We've got a couple head nods here. Of course, I can't see most of your heads there because you refused to put on cameras even though I asked you to. Oh, my camera doesn't work. So please just remember that there's so much that goes, and it's the same with the Count of Monte Cristo. You learn customs and languages and history and
some places.
Geography, yeah, all of it. That's the same here.
Wait, so I have a question about the title.
The Miserables.
That's what it's called?
Yes, that's what it's called.
Okay.
The Miserables. That's what it's called.
So that's the other title.
It's, yes.
Yeah.
We know from the start it's a tragedy, right? It's called The Miserables. Now, does that square with reality?
Is reality now? For right now? Well,
yeah, good question. Both. Does it square with our reality now?
A little bit.
Because y'all say the rosary every day, right? At the end of the rosary, you say the Hail Holy Queen. Mm-hmm. And in the Hail Holy Queen, we refer to our situation now as the Valley of Tears. Yes? Yeah. So, yeah, it's called The Miserables. But does that mean that the whole thing's going to be miserable?
No.
No, it does not. No, it does not. I'm not going to read it to you again, but it was so good. The characters, in turn, are backdrops for the universal story of man. I do not mean to imply that Les Mis is some sort of grand allegory, but rather that Hugo is examining eternal and mysterious things in the pages of his justly famous novel. Understood in this light, the above-mentioned interludes become a necessary component of the work. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, I'm narrowing it and narrowing it and narrowing it. The next thing I want to talk about is specifically in the French Revolution, we have we have the central one idea, if you will, of the French Revolution wrapped up in 3 words. Liberty, equality, fraternity.
Mrs. Loftus?
Darling.
So, they were bad, right? Like Marius and his friends, they were bad.
So,
because I never understood that. I always thought that they were good.
Alice, you bring up a very good point, and no one else really knows what you're talking about, but let me just say this. The difference between a modern day silly little story where no, let me rephrase. In a book this big, you will meet complex characters who are, for the most part, neither wholly good nor wholly evil or bad. So I cannot answer you right now about Marius or about Jean Valjean or about any of them really, or about the bishop, right? Because he's painting a picture in which so much blood has just been shed that he's trying to find reality again when it regards people. Because how can people do that to each other? They literally had blades that fell from a rope and chopped people's heads off. And they were chopping so many people's heads off that the blades got dull and they had to drop it 2 or 3 times on one person's neck in order to cut it before they sharpened the blade.
That's called torturing.
That's evil. That's evil. And once you live through or in very, recent memory are things like that in your country, you say, how did this happen? What were they trying to do? What does it mean about man? And how are we ever going to be human after this? These are all big questions. Today, it's a lot more subtle, but it goes on the same. It's called abortion. And the reason that I, 53 years old, and a mother of 7, having gone through stuff, I cannot go to the March for Life because I cannot stand to see the posters of the babies. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't look at it. It breaks my heart and I'm a mess. I can't do it. But that's what goes on today. Mothers allow their babies to be ripped out of their wombs. That's what goes on today. Never mind the blades and chopping off the heads. It's the same thing, different age. And a lot more, what?
Apparently, over all the wars in history, there have been between like 200 and a billion deaths. And since 1980, there have been over 1.5 billion abortions.
I can't deal.
Well, somebody said you can't just go to the playground and murder an 80-year-old boy. Then how can you do the same to an 8-month-old boy, right?
Because they don't count it as a baby.
Right.
They don't think it's possible.
Yeah. I'm sorry to bring up all this unpleasantness, Les Miserables, right? What I'm trying to say is, does that mean that every single woman or teenage girl who has an abortion means what they're doing? No. At some level they do, but they don't know. Sometimes they do. The people who are performing the procedures certainly do.
Yep.
But Alice,
You'd say that abortion for some people wouldn't be a mortal sin?
I don't know. All we can say objectively is hate the sin, love the sinner. The sin is murder, pure and simple. Okay? It's pure and simple murder. It's what it is. Every single time. And he's saying it's 1.5 billion in 40 years. When you really think about it like that, don't you feel like you're currently in the wave of a humongous ocean with the waves crashing on you and you're rolling around and your face is sliding into the sand because you're like, I don't get it. Where am I? This is all wrong. This is so wrong. Because at the same time, every single one of you has a mother who's like a saint for what she does for your family. Am I right?
Yep.
And that's beautiful and that's good and that's holy and that's everything that life and living should be. But in between the worst and the best is this mess, this miserable mess. And we all want to fix it. There's not a single person you could talk to who wouldn't be like, we need to make this better than it is right now. But then as soon as you start talking about we need to make this better, you have feminists with scrunched faces who are like, you can't take away our abortion. And they say that taking that away is going to make society worse. So it goes back to the isms that I started this whole week-long lecture on. It goes back to the isms. Some isms point to the right solutions and most isms don't. So in my little example I just gave, feminism does not point to the right solution for the misery of man. But Catholicism does. Now when we get to this section of history and the thinking of this section of history, the idea, all of the ideas flow from the Protestant Revolution. And if you understand nothing else, this is what you have to understand. The triangle was ruined, and we have yet to recover from it. But one of the solutions to the misery of man, according to the French Revolution, was if only man could be liberated, each man could be equal to the others. And so we could be free, we could be equal, and we could all just love each other, it would be solved. And voila, we'd have a happy society, a non-miserable society. And for this man, since you've done your author profile, you know that he was stuck in the middle of Catholicism and Enlightenment, right? And whereas he started out with the Catholicism, the spirit of the day and all the ideas, and he swirled in all of them. And then he saw that, yeah, we need to feed the people. They're starving. We need to educate them. They're stupid. If only we could do those two things, voila, society would get so much better. Okay, let's say that's true. How are you going to get from poverty and uneducated to feeling full and feeling educated? Well, if you don't have the... What, darling?
Start educating yourself.
I mean, yes, but if you don't have the right ism, then you have the public schools of today. That's education, but it's absolutely destroying society. I remember, this is going back like 8 years, I was in a public school in Fairfax when my kids were Irish dancing, and on the walls, I'm not kidding because I took them down, on the walls of that school were all kinds of little hand-drawn rainbow things and talking about equality and liberty and fraternity. I'm not kidding. With rainbow flags. If only we could all be free to be you and me, right? Imagine what this world could be. This were the posters from the little 9th and 10th graders downstairs lining up the hallways when we were there at night. And these were the posters.
9th and 10th graders drawing rainbows. Like,
yes, because what is it representing, Alice?
well,
Oh well.
sin, pride.
I mean, yeah, but they don't think it is. They think that's how we're going to fix society. You have to let everyone love is love.
By drawing rainbows.
Yes, because it was all the slogans that went with the rainbows that mattered. Freedom, expression, love is love, don't hate, nonsense, baloney, error, falsity. But that's education today. If you don't have the right ism, public education for all is a reality. Victor Hugo would come to America and be like, yeah, that's it. No child left behind. Free school lunch. They're fed. Now they're fed and they're educated. Do we have a better society? No, we don't. Because your ism is wrong. So when we dive into this book, we're going to be introduced to characters who are neither all good or all bad, Alice. That's just not this novel.
So they're lukewarm. Isn't that the worst?
It's fallen, it's flawed, it's misled, it's sometimes evil, it's sometimes good intentioned with the wrong ism, it's all of that. And And that's kind of real life. Right? Do you know any perfect person? Raise your hand if you know living today a perfect person. Raise your hand and tell me who it is. Not one. There's not one. Well, she says.
I have a couple in my mind.
Wow.
I'm flattered, Alice.
I'm not gonna name names though.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about liberty, equality, and fraternity, and what's wrong with that. Like most everyone, I could not help but be moved by the musical Les Miserables. It seemed a powerful story of redemption, and I even found myself feeling sympathetic to the young revolutionaries as they sang their final stirring anthem from the barricades. I am afraid that is where my sympathy for the Jacobins ends. My antipathy to the French Revolution was brought into focus by Dom Gregory Pilcher's observation while I was visiting in his Arkansas parish last week. Enjoying a grumble, Father Pilcher said, "The problem is that Americans have replaced faith, hope, and charity with liberté, égalité, and fraternité."
Why are the Americans stealing the French's thing? Liberty.
Just the vibe.
Oh.
Freedom, equality, fraternity. Such that, the fraternity part, such that if you say that illegal immigrants need to go back home, you're a hater. You do not have brotherly love.
Whoa.
Whoop! See how that just flipped?
Have you ever watched that video of that guy bringing illegal immigrants to some liberal's house and saying just they can stay there?
Yeah,
And they don't want them.
They set up camp on Nancy Pelosi's front yard. She has a wall, by the way. It is a kind of secular heresy, for heresy is not a lie but a half-truth. Heresy in one truth promoted to the exclusion of another. Heresy is also one truth promoted above another truth to which it should be subject. Heresy lacks the proper order of goods and ignores the hierarchy of truth. Heresy is truth distorted and disordered. When this happens, even the truth that is espoused becomes deformed. Without faith, hope, and charity, liberty, which we all need in order to do the good, right? Liberty becomes license. If nothing is a sin, everything is permitted. You have license to sin. Liberty becomes license. Equality becomes the destruction of those who seem superior. And fraternity becomes no more than indolent tolerance. Echoing the anthems of the French Revolution, the progressives in America have embraced liberty, equality, and fraternity as the only virtues. Consequently, liberty now means every man must be allowed to do whatever he pleases as long as he doesn't hurt anybody. What everyone misses is that this is the motto of the Satanists. Do as you please, but harm none. That's in quotes. Did you know that? The obsession with equality has become an aggressive attack on any person who in any way might just possibly be racist, homophobic, misogynistic, or just plain unkind in any conceivable way. Such individuals must be isolated, ostracized, punished, and persecuted by the crowd howling for equality. Equality has become, as it was in the French Revolution, not just mob rule, but a mob rampage. As we saw with Black Lives Matter, when it was okay that they were throwing bricks into store owners' windows and burning stuff and chucking bombs into cop cars and all that, that's okay. Mostly peaceful here.
Well, people are seeing it. If you're
While there's fires and a guy climbing the fence in the back. Mostly peaceful protests. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? Remember that scene? Fraternity is not the fond embrace of one's fellow man, but an indolent acceptance of every other person without discernment of character or recognition of accomplishment. For the modern progressive, fraternity is an obliteration of personality, a dumbing down of individual ideas, and a leveling of the population so that everyone becomes a cipher, a comrade, a drone, and a drudge. So, honest to God, there's in that same school I was telling you about, they didn't give grades.
They didn't give grades.
They didn't give A, B, C, D, F. They didn't
Because
give
everyone was equal. Whoa, whoa.
Well, because also you don't want them to feel bad if they didn't do as well as the white guy next to him.
What? They didn't work hard. What do you mean?
While these three imposters might be called virtues, notice that there is little about them which an individual soul might work on to become more truly virtuous. Liberty may be a stirring battle cry, but how do I attain this virtue? Except by demanding that I be permitted to do whatever I want, provided that I allow everyone else to do what they want. Right? Faith is a virtue, liberty, not. If I'm simply doing what I want, how is that virtuous? For virtue by definition demands personal discipline and self-sacrifice. Interesting point. Notice how we always wish to be equal to those above us and not to those below. You remember the experiment that the teacher did?
What?
About the group project?
No.
There was just going to be one grade in the class. Every person was going to get the same grade. And it depended on the work that everybody did, so they're all supposed to work together. So in the beginning, the one person does all the work and they all get an A because the one person did the work. And then finally he's like, why am I doing all the work? No one's helping. And they're all taking my A. So he stops working.
And they all got to see something.
And then all the grades started going down and they start blaming the guy who's not doing the work. And pretty soon they all end up with Fs. Like, well, no one wanted to do the work. And then the guy who was doing the work was getting penalized when he wasn't doing the work, even though it was only by his work that anyone got anything good.
Why didn't you tell the teacher?
Well, it was the teacher's experiment to show you, like, this is what equality looks like, people.
Oh.
When you say I want to be equal, you're not saying I want to be equal to the poor guy who's out on the street holding the sign. You want to be equal to the guy who's worked for the money that he's got, or inherited it, or whatever.
It's kind of like giving communism.
Yes. How then might I obtain the virtue of equality without self-assertion and hubris? I might try to consider others to be my equal, but this virtue is hardly more than a good idea. And should I try to put it into effect, I should be prepared to receive a good knock on the head from the person I was trying to treat equally. For in so doing, I had proclaimed him inferior to me and patronized him. Fraternity is not a virtue, but a vague ideal. I may wish all men to be my brother, but I am like Edna St. Vincent Millay, who said, I love humanity, but I hate people. What is there to bring me together with another human being? A shared ideology and a shared goal might make me cast an arm around a shoulder, but sharing a goal makes me a teammate, not a brother. Fraternity remains elusive, for most attempts at brotherhood end as Cain and Abel did. The theological virtues, on the other hand, balance and empower the lesser virtues of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty is balanced by faith, for faith is the implicit trust and relationship with the other, while liberty is the individualistic assertion of oneself. Hope inspires equality because hope longs for a future fulfillment of the self instead of grasping at a superficial equality that never satisfies. We're all equal in that God gave us a soul and we all equally can strive towards heaven. Right? Charity balances the longing for fraternity by replacing a bland, self-serving comradeship with bold, self-sacrificial love. Like when you go to the graveyard in cold November and pray for the poor souls. The conservative sees what is good in liberty, equality, and fraternity, but sees within these secular virtues a deep and more original good. The theological virtues are supernatural gifts that inspire and empower, not the liberty, equality, and fraternity of revolution, but the true freedom that comes from faith, the fulfillment of the individual, and the fire of divine love that purifies and transforms both the human soul and human society. Now, I need you to keep this in mind because this is a very motivating story about, it starts out by thinking about a woman with her starving children and her brother going to steal bread for them. This is terrible and you're going to feel it. And you're going to want a quick solution, but I just read you what the solution is and what the solution is not. Okay, finally. I can't do it. It'll be giving away the story. I can't do it. I need you to tell me from your slight delve into Victor Hugo what the most interesting part was regarding his Catholicism. He was raised by a Catholic mom and an atheist dad, says Bridget, so he was set up for failure. He grew up Catholic. I think I remember looking this up with Pauline. Did he die Catholic? You know how you go back to where he came from in the end? I think the answer was no. Anybody else? Catholicism, Hugo.
I just mentioned that he was Catholic. Should I put more?
Yeah, in one of the classes I said that I was really good at
I know, but in the one that I was reading, it was like Britannica. They didn't have much about his Catholic faith.
Yeah. Correct, so that's why I wanted you to dig a little deeper than Britannica. That was the entire motivation for the thing that I said. Yes.
Oops.
Anybody else?
He was a deist.
He was a deist. What do you mean by that? You're not wrong. Tell me if you can't hear.
He was an anti-royalist, anti-clericalist, but a deist.
Okay. He was an anti-royalist.
His mom was a royalist, wasn't she?
Correct.
Yeah, he grew up a royalist
Right.
and Catholic, but then he got out and he started studying law and becoming some big accomplished scholar and writer.
Yeah, he became an accomplished scholar and forsook all of the
Right.
truth that he knew and imbibed all the
He's
ideas of
also
the day. He was
clerical, which
anti-clerical.
he didn't like clergymen, which is seen in Hunchback of Notre Dame because the guy is.
Okay, so Bridget's bringing up a really good point. We talked about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Do you know the basic stories? Everyone know the basic story?
Yeah.
No.
I watched the movies to it.
That's okay. So tell me basically what goes on.
He is a hunchback in Notre Dame, and he gets bullied for being a hunchback. And I always cried during that movie. I haven't watched it since I was like 6, but it was really sad. It was like the black and white version. That was so sad. And my entire life, I've always been wondering if he was real.
So he's bullied because he looks like a monster. So he takes refuge where?
In a church.
In Notre Dame, and then they try to kill him, don't they?
Well, so this was an early work of Hugo's, and
He created it to show people what society is like during that time. There's no equality.
there's no equality, and nobody cares about the poor guy. And then the priest at Notre Dame is like the most wicked one.
Because he hated church.
Yeah. So
With good reason too, because they were.
So there were,
bad
right,
like
this
that.
is the same problem, the age-old problem we go back to. There's no perfect person in the world. Clergy are people, therefore they're not perfect. Is that
But they should be pretty close to perfect.
they should be always trying and correct.
Like more than we should be trying. They should be trying more than we should be trying.
And they have more grace than we do. However, in the Hunchback of Notre Dame story, the cleric was seen as the most cold-hearted, wicked character in the book. Now, that is Hugo in his early adulthood being anti-clerical.
And
Anti-Catholic.
against.
Now, you are not going to understand the first 50 pages of this book because there's a Bishop Benvenu who is like one of the best characters in the book, and he's a Catholic bishop. What?
Well, he's also.
He changed his mind.
Uh-uh.
Hugo?
He did not.
No, he didn't.
Because what Hugo is going to do with the bishop is the exact same thing that people do today. It's like, we don't need the institution of the church, and we don't need the rituals and rites of the church, but spiritually, Catholics can be wonderfully good people, just like spiritually Anglicans can be good people, just like spiritually Orthodox people can be good, just like spiritually Jewish people can be good, just like spiritually Muslim people can be good. That's the spiritualism that you can still have. That's what the deism is, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, he knew that there was a creator. He just didn't believe in the Catholic.
right. The deists
He
say,
said he was a rational deist, so he could reason that there was a higher power, but he wouldn't acknowledge that.
this is exactly what goes on today. You can reason to a higher power, but then God can just kind of be whatever suits your spirituality. Because we don't need the institution, and we certainly don't need the hierarchy telling us anything. Does that make sense? It will make more sense when we get into the story, but so you said anti-cleric, anti-Catholic, and anti-royalist. Now, you're saying the same thing with all three of those. What are we rejecting?
Well,
God.
Yes, but particularly,
Tradition.
yes, tradition, absolutely.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, we're rejecting the hierarchy. And the tradition of the church, Thomas, is to retain that medieval idea of hierarchy because that is what is true. And then this applies to everything. When you look at what they did with the Mass, right? We had hierarchy like this, and now we're like, everyone's on the same level, and the priest half the time is off to the side because all the lay people are doing stuff. You see? That's what goes on. So when we get into it and you meet all these characters, understand what Hugo's doing. He wants you to feel the devastation of the period, which is real. People are starving in the gutters. Women are very mistreated, and they're not educated.
also, when he was writing this, his daughter and her husband, they both died. So he wanted, I guess he used his own grief to kind of,
They died how?
they drowned.
Accident?
It's a dance.
This is yet another author who, through his own grief, is trying to figure out life, society, and what happens after. Right?
Kind of went downhill from there, because then he got a mistress. And he still had a boy.
This is when he was, exiled. So this is his final book, and it's like, it's a lot more nuanced, say, than Hunchback, where his ideas were kind of a little more black and white. He's swirling, but I'll ask Pauline, but I seem to think we looked him up because we were hoping that in the end he came back to his Catholic roots or deathbed conversion or whatever, but I seem to recall that not only did he not, he's buried
He was buried.
in the Pantheon.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is non-Catholic. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
And his funeral was at the Arc de Triomphe. I went there.
Oui.
Really cool.
Tomorrow,
You know.
tomorrow we are having the religion test, and Monday your FAUST paper is due. So I'm not going to make you raise your hand if you've started it, but you should have started it. It's a complicated paper. Are there any questions on that?
No.
Okay, but I'm going to see you
10,
at 11:10.
11 something. Yeah.
Find something to do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.